What pawn structures should black aim for in the Vienna Gambit? Have you ever wondered how to respond effectively to the Vienna Gambit? This opening can be tricky, especially with white's aggressive pawn push. Let's break down the pawn structures that black should aim for to counter this strategy. First, central pawn presence is key. Black should consider playing pawn to d6 and pawn to e5. This setup reinforces control over the center and prevents white from advancing their pawns too freely. The combination of these two pawns creates a solid barrier that supports piece development and counters white's initiative. Next, it is important to avoid creating pawn weaknesses. Black should steer clear of doubled pawns or isolated pawns, as these can become long-term vulnerabilities. A compact pawn structure is essential, so be cautious about making unnecessary pawn moves that could create holes. For example, avoid playing pawn to f5 too early, as this could lead to doubled pawns on the f-file. Flexibility is another important aspect of black's pawn structure. Black should aim for a setup that allows for counterattacks. Moves like pawn to c6 and pawn to d5 can help challenge white's central pawns later in the game. This counterplay is vital for neutralizing white's early aggression and working towards an equal position. If black decides to accept the gambit pawn on f4, the pawn structure may become asymmetrical. In this case, be prepared to retreat the knight, perhaps moving it back to g8. This helps avoid traps and allows black to reorganize their pawn structure. Supporting the center with pawn to d6 while preparing to challenge white's advanced pawn on e5 is a solid plan. Lastly, overextending pawns too early can create targets for white's pieces. The goal is to maintain a harmonious structure that supports piece activity without leaving exploitable weaknesses. In summary, black's ideal pawn structure against the Vienna Gambit involves a strong central formation with pawns on e5 and d6. Avoiding doubled or isolated pawns is essential, while maintaining flexibility for counterplay with pawn to c6 and pawn to d5. Carefully managing the tension created by white's early pawn push will support black's development and help neutralize white's attacking chances.